Everyone loves a good 50mm lens, right? Except for those of you that don't actually like 50mm for whatever reason. But today we're going to be talking about two of the newest releases for the Sony E-Mount and Leica L-Mount, and that is the 50mm f1.4 art lens and the 50mm f2 contemporary lens from Sigma. This video isn't sponsored by Sigma, and I did reach out to them to ask if I could start reviewing some of their lenses. So these lenses are going back soon. The 50 Art is going back tomorrow. So they have no say in this video or anything. So these are my thoughts and my thoughts only. Now, right off the bat, these things are very different, but also very similar. I'll also say that both of them are fantastic performers, especially for the price. And I think price is going to be the thing that makes these so dang popular. The 50mm 1.4 DGDN art lens comes in at $850, and the 50mm f2 DGDN contemporary lens comes in at $639. So I don't currently have the 50 1.2 G Master or the 50 1.4 G Master, but as a, I guess, quick comparison in that game, the 50mm art has a little bit more chromatic aberration that I noticed, but pretty much everything else about this lens was really, really close to the output of the 50 1.4 GM. So if you are willing to deal with the extra weight that this gives you over something like that much smaller G Master lens, to save literally hundreds of dollars off of the 51.4 GM. So here's my super quick recommendation on that. If the 50mm is your go-to, it's the lens you use by far the most, the 50 GM is probably worth buying, either the 1.2 or the 1.4. Personally, I pre-ordered the 1.4, but if the 50mm is a complementary lens, something that you might not be using every single day, but you want to have a very, very high quality 50mm lens and you need 1.4, this is where this lens is definitely going to come into play. Now, the rest of this video, we are going to be comparing the 50 f2 with the 51.4, both of these from Sigma. Now, both of these are well under the pricing of the G Master lenses. Again, this one's coming in at $639, this one at $849. So for the money, you aren't really going to be able to get much else at all for this quality. The 1.4 obviously is fairly large. It feels heavy, it feels large and a little bit lopsided in terms of weight goes. Coming in at 660 grams, it's definitely not a lens I would want to carry around all day or anything like that. But this 50mm f2 has very, very similar performance in terms of sharpness. And if you don't need 1.4, you can just see how much better that works. I do have a base plate on here, so it's adding a little bit to the bottom of this camera, but easily can float above there. No balance issues at all. But then when we're looking at the 51.4, it's definitely very, very front heavy. You can obviously just hear it. As soon as I put it down, it's gonna straight, fall forward. And it makes sense because they are very, very different in terms of their both size and weight. The 50 f2 comes in at 345 grams. So not exactly half the weight of the 51.4, but 660 versus 345, pretty close to being halfway. In terms of extra features, obviously with the art lens here, you're gonna have just a little bit more customization. Both of them have aperture rings, both of them have AF/MF switches, but then the art lens also adds a AF lock button or just an extra button, customizable for whatever you need it to do, as well as allows you to make the aperture clickless in case you want to do some stop downs without hearing the, and allows you just to get a stepless aperture change if you're doing video. But if you're doing photos, doesn't really matter that much. Now the 50 f2 is part of their contemporary line or their I series of lenses. They have a whole plethora of lenses, and especially if I was making a kit where I didn't need 1.4 glass, it would be very easy as they were continuing to just make lens after lens after lens to be able to put something like this in a kit of mine. So let's jump into images real quick, talk about what we see and compare the differences, and then I will give you my final thoughts. Okay, so apologies for the voice. I've been sick all week, and this is the most I've talked all week, but moving on. So on the left side here, we will have the 50 f2 contemporary, and then on the right, we will have the 50 1.4 art lens, both of them at the same settings. Also, this is obviously outdoors, so a little bit of change in the weather and clouds and things like that. Obviously, you're getting a shallower depth of field over here on the art lens. You can definitely see some chromatic aberration, and both of these were given the pre-production like lens corrections things that we had to manually insert directly from Sigma. So I am using their profile corrections as well as the little box of removing chromatic aberration. This is what we're still getting here. Not a huge deal, but definitely more noticeable, I would say, on the art lens, oddly enough, and probably mostly just because it's slightly more out of focus. In terms of the bokeh, you can definitely see it's a little bit bigger on the art lens, obviously, 1.4 versus f2, but it's a little bit harder, and you can see almost like a little bit of chromatic aberration or something around the edges there. And we'll see if this kind of sticks, but the art lens also seems to be a little bit warmer. So here's another one, same spot. It also looks like the 1.4, the art lens, is a little bit warmer, and you can definitely see a lot of chromatic aberration where it's less of like that magenta and green as it is like almost like a pink and cyan. Definitely noticeable here. And you can see it on the contemporary lens as well, but obviously because it's a little bit less out of focus, it's probably just not showing up as much. But I will say, again, this is at 200%, but still, it's definitely more chromatic aberration that I would like to see out of something like this. This is at 100%, and you can definitely still see it. Less on the contemporary lens, but again, that's probably just because there's the extra depth of field going on there. So here's another one just to kind of show what like a more full body portrait would look like. Again, the art lens is definitely warmer, and these were shot on the same white balance, so just what the lens is rendering. You can definitely see chromatic aberration again. Another one of these things that's like a total stress test because you're getting very, very light stuff coming off of the Hasselblad here. But I mean, overall, good separation from the subject. One of the things I slightly noticed here as well is that it's hard to tell right here, but it does seem like the profile corrections are slightly different between the f2 and the 1.4. Yeah, if we just go back and forth, the f2 seems to be a little bit more bowed, where the 1.4 seems a little bit more straight. Again, that's probably more of a profile correction kind of thing, especially because it seems like the f2 takes out more of the vignetting as well. But who knows? Maybe that's going to be something that's going to change in the, I don't know, final profile corrections or whatever of this lens. So probably not something I would worry about at all, but just something interesting as I was looking through them like that. Now getting into more of kind of like the bokeh test, seeing what the out of focus elements are actually looking like. And obviously, you're going to get more in the 1.4 than you are in the f2, but I think it's not, I guess, as dramatic as I would think it would be. It's hard to do this from kind of this depth, but I was trying to kind of focus on the 500 here. It seems like the art lens hit that maybe a little bit better in terms of the focus, but you can also see that there's plenty of sharpness kind of through the texture of the side of the camera here. Not the end of the world, but another one of those things that, like myself as a wedding photographer for client work, I'm definitely cleaning up on images. I still use, again, the 28-70 that also exhibits a lot of this, so it's not like I refuse to use a lens like this, but if I do have an option that doesn't have as much chromatic aberration, I will definitely go with that. Here's another one to just sort of show the close focus and show the fall off. Obviously, you're getting kind of a lot more over here. I accidentally forgot to change the shutter speed, so that's why the art lens is a stop brighter. But the point kind of still stands. You can tell that, especially really, really close up, it's a fairly dramatic difference in kind of that minimum focus in terms of how much you can get, where I'm not even really sure how much of this is even in focus at all. Yeah, it looks like maybe on the art lens, maybe we're a little bit front focused here even. It looks like we have more sharpness here. And the contemporary lens looks like it's closer to the field of view there. But the ultra minimum focus distance kind of thing is definitely a stress test that's not going to make a lot of lenses look very good regardless. But I mean, I guess that's what doing some tests like this is for. All right, then here's another. Kind of just see that longitudinal chromatic aberration. You can see that it really starts to stretch on the art lens at minimum focus. I mean, this is like 45 centimeters, I think, is pretty close to the minimum focus, but it really starts to shift here quite a bit. And oddly enough, you're getting, I would say, a little bit more of the traditional types of chromatic aberration, longitudinal chromatic aberration, in terms of the, I guess, a little bit more of a green here, and then you definitely get that super cyan blue-ish on the contemporary lens. And I'm not sure if that's a coating thing or what that is, but interesting nonetheless. But very interesting to see how much and how distorted this stuff gets as it gets out of focus. But in terms of minimum focus distance, they both are fairly similar. Honestly, it does seem like the contemporary lens does a very, very, very good job wide open. All right, and for a final, just another little bokeh test of sorts. Just wanted to check kind of fine focus on this little leaf here. Both are very sharp. Again, these are all at 200% too. So we're going beyond what kind of like a full resolution is as well. Zoom into 200%, and then you're going to see this at YouTube's compression. So only so much you can do. Both of them have a little bit of a structure around the edge that's a little bit hard, but nothing that's like too much or too distracting. I think both of the bokeh are fairly good. You get a little bit more cat's eye, it looks like, on the art lens, and definitely something you get on both of the Sony GM lenses as well. So I'm not docking any points for that, but you definitely get a little bit more of it on the art lens. Yeah, it looks like the art lens is probably focused more maybe here on this leaf, where the contemporary lens is probably focused ever so slightly maybe back from this. So they're going to be just a little bit different on that, but you can still see the sharpness in both of them, where you can see a lot of the texture on this leaf here, a lot of the texture on this leaf here, and obviously the bokeh. Not as much of a difference, to be honest, as I was anticipating, but still really interesting nonetheless. So to sort of wrap this up here, there's going to be a little bit of this that's kind of just like, well, yeah, obviously. But it's mainly going to be the difference between the size and weight of the 50 f2 and the size and weight and extra light gathering ability of the 1.4. You obviously are saving a couple $100 buying the 50 f2, but to be honest, if you're spending a couple $1,000s on a body, $100 or $2 isn't that big of a difference. So I don't think it would be something that would sway me. I'm also the kind of person that really does need that f1.4 at times. I do a lot of weddings in very dark environments, and there's some times where I'm just pushing the camera to its limit. So between the two for my professional work, I would absolutely buy the 1.4, especially at that $850 brand new price tag. Like, it's kind of like a no-brainer. The only thing that I could say is, you know, that like someone like myself, I love the 50mm focal length, and I decided to buy the GM version, but I think that they are going to be selling a ton of these, because for the price point and for what it is, $850, man, it's just an incredible lens. Now, if I was not photographing weddings, I would probably purchase this lens. Sure, it's a little bit cheaper. Again, that's not that big a deal, but I guess, you know, that could help you buy some ND filters or some other stuff. And the fact that I could easily put this on my camera all day, walk around, I could hike with this. I could do a lot of other things that I wouldn't necessarily want to be carrying the weight of the 1.4 for. And since the image quality from what I've seen is pretty darn similar in terms of performance, I think that the trade-offs for a lot of people who shoot around f2 more often than not is probably going to be worth it. And again, for such a small price point and size, I think this is kind of like a no-brainer as well. So thanks so much for watching. Let me know if you have any questions about either of these. If you want to learn more about my thoughts on Sigma lenses in general, and specifically the 28-70, you can check that video out up here. You can watch my Sony 50mm 1.4 video up here, and I will see you in one of those.